This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew. Welcome to the Craft Beer and Brewing Podcast. I'm your host, co-founder, and editorial director of Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine, Jamie Bogner. This is episode 230, and we are back in Belgium this week for the podcast, episode number 230, with Nino Bacelle of Ranke and Doteny.
Doteny is a good way to speak out, yes.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the podcast, Nino.
Thank you.
And also co-hosting with me is Joe Stank. Welcome, Joe.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Joe has been leading the charge in our trip through Belgium, and it was the crucial producer pulling all of this together and connecting everything so that we can bring these conversations to you. We are going. This is a surprise episode because, you know, as we've been here in Belgium talking about Belgian beers, we really haven't. We've been talking about very traditional styles. We've been talking about sour beers and lambic, but we're going to talk about hops in a very significant way in this episode, because that is something near and dear to Ranke and their approach to brewing with XX bitter and other beers. They are a very specific, very principled, very direct way of using hops, and we're going to talk about how they do that, and because it's a beautiful approach to using hops in their beer. Before we do that, what if you could chill your beer with a more efficient chiller? The answer, G&D Chiller's new micro-channel condensers. G&D's micro-channel condensers are highly efficient in hotter regions, use a fraction of the refrigerant over traditional chillers, which provides less opportunity for leaks, along with lower global warming potential. G&D Chiller's engineers are committed to green technology design while developing a more efficient chiller for the brewing industry. Contact G&D Chillers today at gdchillers.com. Also, this episode is brought to you by BSG and RAR Malting Company, the home of fossil-free malt. RAR's headquarters in Shakopee, Minnesota, is powered by renewable electricity. Malt houses and kilns are fed by an electrostatic boiler fueled by agricultural byproducts, much of which is waste from the malting process. By eliminating the use of natural gas, RAR Malting Company reduces CO2 emissions by 260,000 tons per year while filling 25% of the U.S. brewing industry's malt needs. Put the power of RAR malt in your beer at go.bsgcraft.com/contact-us. Nino, as we normally start the podcast, we normally start with a little bit of background and history. Why don't you tell us about your background and history leading up to and then the founding and creation of Ranke?
Yeah. In fact, my grandfather was a beer staker. You know, a Heuse-staker, a blender of Geuse. In the old times, breweries had no bottling lines. So in 1930, my grandfather started buying beer in wooden kegs and then put it in bottles and selling it to the public. So that's very common then in that era. And short after, he started also to make soft drinks, lemonade and gas water. So and it went from there. So I was born in the third generation, and my father was still beer distributor and small lemonade factory. So when I was young, I didn't see too much future in this business, but I was very interested in beer and especially what you could see then when I was young. I'm born in 58. I was young in 78, and then it just popped up. The craft beer was not yet in Belgium already. Maybe it started in America then. And but what we could see is we still had 120 breweries in Belgium. And we could see 30, 40 that were becoming bigger, industrial and automatic. And then we could see 80 breweries where the owner was also 80 years old, where the kids would do it. And often we could drink the best beer there. So we wondered why. But at that moment we were we were more or less in the business, but most beer lovers. We were not brewers. So at that moment, we visited a lot of breweries, and at one moment we could see that all brewers were disappearing. They were just stopping. The kids said, "We're gonna sell the building," and it was done. And then we could see everything disappear. And on the meantime, we could see the bigger breweries that still had good beer, good bitter beer, just changing the recipes. They were making beer sweeter, less bitterness, and it will becomes all more industrial. So at a certain moment, I felt that I should do something, but I didn't have the skills at that moment. So it took me 10 more years to learn to brew, to homebrew. We started homebrewing in 1981. And first thing I did was buying not malt, but barley at the farmer and malt it myself. And then it was not very good beer. So it took me some years to make good beer. And at a certain moment, I had the opportunity in 1994 to hire a brewery. And I think I was the first one in Belgium who did that. We hired the equipment of the Deca brewery, and we went there to brew the beer. So that's where it all started, in fact. And from the beginning, I was a beer lover, a bitter beer lover. Little by little, I saw where the things are in this bitterness, because it's much easier to work with pellets and extract. Most of the breweries did that. Even the young brewers were tending more to pellets and extract, because all the installations, the equipment you can find is made for that. It's a copy of an industrial brewery. At the Deca brewery, we were near Poperinge, near West Vleteren also. And we could see that the hop farmers that still were in that region around Poperinge mostly sell their hops to abroad. They were selling the hops to pellet factories in Germany or in England, and there it was transformed, and then from there it was sold. So I think at that moment it was strange for us to see breweries that were in that area not using hops from the farm, straight from the farm,
right?
Because it was so near, and you could go there with the hop harvest and see all this beauty, and it was just like lost in the pellet factory for us. So the main thing, the main problem with whole hops was most of the farmers just breed it and then harvest it, they dry it, then it sits in the farm for another 2 months, and then in end of November they start to deliver it to the breweries or to the pellet factory. But because this period was only 1 or 2 months on the farm, they didn't see the thing to put a fridge, for example. So the hops were losing quality on the farm,
right?
And then after it was pelletized, or it was sold to the brewer, and then you get your hops in November, and it was quite good. But then end of the season, you could see quality dropping very fast because you lost quality in the beginning of the season.
Sure, you negatively affected the hop stability.
And that's what we discovered during our first years, that if you got the hops straight from the harvest by 1st of October, you put it in the fridge, you could go until the end of the season without almost no losses of quality. So that's why at a certain moment we were brewing XX bitter, for example, and in the beginning we get delivered hops in November. By, let's say, March, when it becomes warmer again, the quality was going down, and then we added some pellets. And immediately we could see that the beer is not the same anymore. If at the bottling, when we tasted it, it's good, but it's not the same. So at a certain moment, we said we have to go back, speak to the farmers, and make an arrangement that they deliver the hops by 1st of October, so that we can put a fridge and put it in and go to the end of the season. And that's how we discovered that you could make very nice beer whole season around with whole hops. The challenge is to conservation of this hops, of course.
Sure.
It's not as stable, of course, as pellets.
Yeah.
With pellets, you top off your quality and you stay stable. Whole hops, you buy them and you have to keep them good as long as possible. Keep them in good shape as long as possible.
Sure. Let's talk about why you insist on using whole cone hops. But before we do that, are you looking for innovation in your next beverage breakthrough? Think outside the puree box and let your brand stand out. With Old Orchard's craft concentrate blends, even smoothie seltzers can benefit from the extra boost of flavor and color. Old Orchard is based in the greater Grand Rapids, Michigan area, also known as Beer City, USA, and supplies craft beverage categories ranging from beer, wine, and cider to seltzer, spirits, and kombucha. To join the core of Old Orchard's brewing community, Learn more at oldorchard.com/brewer. Also, Brew Monitor from Precision Fermentation is the first real-time comprehensive fermentation monitoring solution. It works with your existing fermentation tanks to track dissolved oxygen, pH, gravity, pressure, temperature, and conductivity in real time from any smartphone, tablet, or PC. Brew Monitor provides detailed insight into your fermentations that helps improve beer consistency, reduce tank time, and increase overall efficiency, saving your brewery time and money. Get started for 30 days risk-free. Visit precisionfermentation.com/brewing. So you found a way to insist that the local hops farms could get you bales of hops fresh after the harvest. But why not use those pelletized hops? Why insist on using whole cone hops?
Just because, like I just said, when we used even 20% of pellets, we could see the taste of especially XX bitter change. I don't say if you have a beer with 25 IBU, it's not so important. But if our beer start at 40 IBU is minimum, and it ends at 75 IBU. So we are all in between this. IBUs means all the beers are bitter, and if with this high bitterness, you can see that the quality is different. The hop taste is more refined, is more balanced. It's not so aggressive. And what happens, in fact, if you grind the whole cone hops to make pellets, you expose the essential oils to the air, and it oxidizes, more or less. So that changes the taste. Another thing is when you make pellets, it's high pressure. High pressure means temperature goes up.
Right.
Even if you chill the forms, it still goes up to 55 degrees. So this 55 degrees will influence also the taste of the hop oil and change it. So a pelletized hop is not the same, even if it's the same variety, the same hops, even from the same field, it's not the same anymore. So like I said before, low IBUs is not a problem, I think. You don't taste it so much. But if you go high, then you can find the difference between pellets. With pellets, you will have a harder, harsher hoppiness, bitterness. With pellets, with flowers, with whole cone hops, you can go further, and it will be more balanced, more softer, and still bitter, but in another way.
There is an argument that some make about pelletized hops that pelletizing process makes it easier to extract, oils compared to a whole flower, whole cone hop, which can either be good or bad, right? It could be a good thing if you are trying to find intensity. It might be a bad thing if you're trying to find more subtlety. But then of course the challenge is that in order to achieve the level of bitterness, especially because you are using pretty low alpha hops, to achieve that kind of bitterness level, it takes a lot of hops.
It takes a lot of hop. If you see what we use in hops, it lies in between 7 and 15 grams per liter. So it's very high. And also it gives you a lot of losses. In fact, using whole hops, you have one advantage for me. Is the taste and the nose. For the rest is only disadvantages. You can buy only once a year. So with the harvest, you can buy whole hops. If the harvest is gone, because we want to buy local, because we want to go there just at the end before the harvest, see the hops and choose the lots we want to buy. And then it's harvested, and in August we have to decide what we're gonna make next year.
Right.
So that's difficult. You always buy too much or not enough.
And it's not like the farmer is going to sit on these extra unpelletized bales of hops. They will pelletize them because that will store for them. Yeah.
Then it's conservable.
So you either buy everything right at the front or you don't get them.
Means you buy too much or not enough. At the end of the season, if you have enough, it's good. But you will have a leftover that costs you money. And on the other hand, if you sell more beer from one kind, we have 10 varieties of hops now, 16 varieties of beer. So it's a difficult puzzle to make and every year to see what we're going to buy. And you always have leftovers. So it's a more expensive way. The other hand is you have also more losses in your production. most of the time you lose like between 5 and 7% of wort
Wow.
in the production because of the whole hops. It sucks the wort,
Sure.
and you can't get it out anymore. So, and the second thing is cleaning. You have to clean it out while the hop flowers you put in, 1 kilogram of hop flowers you put in your boil gives you 7 extra kilograms of wort that stays in the hops. So you put in like 30 kilogram and you get back 300 kilogram. That's more or less what it is. So it's a lot of cleaning. It makes so in the system we have, because when we built this system,
it's designed for this.
It was designed to make 1 brew a week. So at that moment it was not a problem. If the hops stay in your kettle, you have the whole week to clean it. But if you
Right, because the kettle is hot. You can't just go in and get them right away.
It's hot and it's still very wet, too much liquid. So it's impossible to clean the same night. So you can't do 2 brews on a row. You have to brew, and you have to leak out all the wort from the hops who are still in the kettle, and to chill it down also. And the day after you can go in. So means every day when we brew, there's a brewer, but it's also an assistant brewer that helps to get the hops out. So it's a hard work and a lot of work, and it's a lot of hours. It's a lot of losses, and you can't use everything. You can't use 100% of the hop you bought. So
Sure. You've also built a kettle that's designed to improve the kind of extraction of hops through that boil.
Yeah, sure. I studied the old brewing kettles from, let's say, before 1900, 19th century. And you could see all the hops, all the kettles were copper and wood-fired. So means the fire was in the middle of the kettle. And the bottom of the kettle was just shaped like that the flame was in the middle. And then on the sides you have a turning of the hot liquid, and it makes turn around the hop flowers. And you get the exchange.
Creates a kind of convective current. Yeah.
And we did the same thing, only with a different boiler, not with a wood fire or a coal fire. So with a blown blower. So we did the same thing on one side. So the bottom from the kettle is shaped like in a slope, and it burns on this sloped bottom, and that gives you the same effect. If you put hops in, if you put like in a kettle of 40 hectoliter, you put 35 kilogram of hops, just takes the hop little by little, the boil takes the hop. You need this like English roaring boil,
right,
to get all the hops to suck all the hops into the wort and have the exchange. Yeah, so you need that, and you can have a violent boil, makes you turn around, makes you it's like a stirring device without stirring device.
Sure.
So it's a natural method of stirring. And the advantage, if you have a stirring device, that would be easy also, but it's in the way for cleaning.
Right.
So in our case, we a guy goes in to clean it out.
And it has that pickup tube that's above the kind of base so that those hops can settle down and you can pull off wort from on top of it.
Yeah, in fact, we use the same as you do for taking your wort from the grain. You let the grain settle down on a filter. We do the same. On the 2 exits of the boiling kettle, we have a strainer that keeps the hops inside. So, and after boiling, we cut the fire for 45 minutes. And at that moment, all the hops go down, make a layer of 0.5 meter. And then you can extract the wort by gravity. And all the impurities, all the albumins and the rest of the grain stays on the hop. The hop functions as a natural filter. So what comes out is clear wort. So you don't need a whirlpool, centrifuge, or something else to get the hop particles out. The hops are here cleaning out the wort. So you get clear wort straight from the boiler.
Now, it's not copper, right? That would be an incredibly expensive brew house today, or is it?
No, it's not copper. It's stainless steel. Yeah.
And so that conducts in a little different way than copper tends to conduct heat too.
Yeah, it's a little different, but it's not a problem. You need to build up the experience with that. So
yeah.
We just build it, and then, like I said, we just build up the experience. And
if we're going to talk about equipment, I'd love to ask about the fermenters too. They're not cylindro-conical fermenters. They're flat bottom, and they get only about 2/3 full. You do 40 hectoliter batch, but they can hold 60. So the fermenting beer, the yeast has room to breathe, and the yeast that you use is expressive. It's a little spicy, but it's in balance with the hops. So maybe you could talk about how all those pieces fit together for the profile.
So when we started brewing at the Deca Brewery, it was still a very, very old-fashioned way of fermentation. We still were open fermenters. So that gives us the idea this is a very nice way to do it. But the disadvantage of the open fermenters is you got a lot of cleaning and it's very difficult to control and to keep it sanitized. So when we started here, we choose for an option where we have a fermenter of 60 hectoliter, who is a closed fermenter, has a spraying bowl inside, so you can clean with the sip system. But for the rest, we work like in an open system. So it's a 60 hectoliter fermenter with a water lock on, with no pressure, and then you put 40 in, and we have almost no temperature control. So we start at 21 degrees, adding the yeast just before the wort goes in, and then we let the fermentation go. Temperature goes up until 28, 29 degrees Celsius. And only if in the summer, if it's too much accumulating heat and the air is not cold enough anymore to chill the fermenter, we just put in some cold water to keep it below 30. But for the rest, we do no temperature control. It goes up from 20 to 30. So we let it play between 20 and 30, and it develops more fruitiness. And what happens after you have a fast first fermentation, after 7 days, most of the times it's finished, and then the yeast is already sedimenting. And after 10 days, most of the time, is depending on how much degrees, how much plateau you have in the beer. But between 8 and 10 days, we are transferring the beer from above, from the normal floor, to the cellar, where it goes in lagering. And it stays in lagering at, keep it in your eyes, 15 degrees Celsius. So it stays at 15 degrees Celsius, means fermentation goes on. High fermentation, if you chill in that phase, the fermentation will stop and you still will have residual sugar. What we do is just keep it at 15 degrees and keep it a little bit longer in the cellar. So we still have 2 weeks of fermentation, but slow fermentation. But you eat all the sugar who is fermentable, and then you stay with beer with zero fermentable sugar and only the unfermentable sugar. And it gives you very good control when you do refermentation at the bottle. And in the keg. We do also refermentation in the keg. So for that, it's super important. After 4 weeks, we can extract the beer when all the yeast is sedimented. We bottle it with adjunct of some sugar do the fermentation. Less sugar for the kegs than for the bottle, of course. But everything is refermented. We have the bottling system and the kegging system is made for flat beer. No pressure.
It's a 2-level fermentation system, where, like you said, where the primary fermentation happens on the upper level. There are small glycol small jackets on those that you can use to cool them just only if it gets too hot, but usually
only
not.
Some degrees, yeah.
Yeah. And then after that primary fermentation, you drop it down into the basement, which everything is in a temperature controlled cooler down there, but it's also in the basement. So it just stays cool. And that's where, you mentioned it conditions for longer, but at a temperature where it can continue to ferment.
Yeah.
So the secondary, I always have to look it up. That's about 59 degrees Fahrenheit for the secondary fermentation. And you're looking at 68, probably up to around 80 for the primary. Yeah. So,
it could be that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, it's cool, definitely not cold.
Right. But then your yeast is not going to drop out. It's going to stay there and continue to work slowly.
It will drop out, but it needs more time. So it just takes time you just need 4 weeks in the cellar. So means in total you have between brewing and bottling you have like 5 to 5.5 weeks. After bottling you need 1.5, 2 weeks for the re-fermentation. The advantage is when you bottle it and the beer comes from 15 degrees and you add some sugar and some new yeast, the fermentation goes very fast. Your fermentation is done in 7 days, and then 98% of the sugar is into alcohol and CO2. Your beer is saturated, and it just need 1 more week to settle down the the yeast again. Of course, in every beer we have, you find some sediment.
Sure.
And also means for the pubs and the bars, it's more difficult. They have to understand that there can be some yeast in your beer at a certain moment. So it's a question, and it's complicated to explain to publicans that you have to let sit a keg of beer 24 hours before you can tap it. So, but it's the only way to make the difference, I think, in our case. Yeah.
From a production standpoint, a lot of breweries use cylindroconical fermenters because, they ferment quickly. It's easy to capture yeast and then, use that, clean it and repitch it. Using these very shallow bottomed wine style fermenters, poses an additional production challenge, certainly around capturing yeast, but then also cleaning. From a sensory perspective, you have to want to do it that way for a very particular reason. And from what you said before, it's because you are trying to go for that open fermentation style within a closed tank.
Yeah. And it's of course you have to be aware that it's a lot of work. If you do it this way, you have to clean every tank 2 times.
A lot of work.
If you have a cylinder conical, you clean 1 time, you take the yeast, and it's very easy, of course. And you can control your temperature. Here we don't control the temperature individually. It's just every tank is, if in first fermentation, your tanks go up to between 20 and 30. And in the secondary fermentation, you stay at 15 degrees. So it's only the ambient who is chilled or controlled. And for the rest, nothing. So it's an old style of making beer. And it gives you more work, but it gives you very nice control on their fermentation, I think. And it's a big advantage if you re-ferment beer, of course. If you don't re-ferment beer, it has no sense. But in our case, for me, it's always important to recreate also the beer from before.
Yeah.
Before, when I'm already quite old. So when I was very young, I could find these beers, taste the beers. I was very lucky. In Belgium, we start very early with drinking beer. So when we were kids at school at 7, 8 years, we were already drinking table beer. And most of the time, by 14, 15 years, you get out and go in a bar and drink a beer. It's not allowed anymore, I think, but it's how it is. And it gives you, at a very young age, this taste of bitterness and beer, and it influences you very much. So I was always dreaming of recreating this beer from the old time. And that's why I very attached to old ways of doing it, because I think it adds a difference. It adds a different taste than the modern way to doing it.
I think maybe that's a good place to start talking about the first beer that you and Guido brewed together. Also was De Ranke's first beer. Mm-hmm. The Huldenberg is a very special triple. Yeah. I think when people think of Belgian triple, they think of beers that are a bit sweet, definitely strong, of course, but also with a spicy profile. And Huldenberg is different. It's bitter. It's dry hopped. And can you talk about maybe what the inspirations were for that beer?
Yeah. Well, in fact, Guldenberg is the beer that I developed before I knew Guido, in fact. Okay. So at that moment, my favorite beers were like Moënnet Blonde, Moënnet Abbey de Moënnet, what it was in that time, a smaller triple and Orval. So I tried to make something, a symbiosis of these 3 beers and the Guldenberg. But what is quite important is dry hopped also. So what is quite important in that is, I think the style of triple we make, it was the general style in the 60s or the 70s. The beer was made a little bit more bitter because it was normal then. In the 60s and 70s, you could find most of the beers were, even most of the Pilsner were 35 IBU. And then in the 70s, 80s, everybody started to lower down the bitterness because it was not needed anymore. So also in the Pilsner, but also in the high fermentation beers, you could find an example of a Trappist beer that was 45 and that is now 29, for example. So it was at a certain moment so common to lower the bitterness that it left a gap in the market, in fact. And when I was getting out the triple, I wanted it to be quite bitter, going back to the taste I remembered. So that's why it's different. But in fact, if you put it in a concours, in a competition now, nine times out of 10 it goes out because it's not conformed to the style. It's too bitter.
Right.
While if you would do the same competition in 1960, I'm sure it would fit the style. But that's little by little, the industry make people accept that triples are sweet and not hoppy. And it's just because of the industry that's like that. So I got back to what is for me the origin with the Guldenberg. And it's an Abbey beer, not because I want to pretend to be a father or to have an Abbey. But if I studied the breweries in 1990, you could see all the breweries in Belgium had an Abbey beer because it was almost the only style besides of a Pilsner, a brown like Rodenbach, and then a Geuze, and then they had an English Pale Ale in the portfolio, and then an Abbey beer. It was as normal as could be that you have an Abbey beer in your style. So I choose the name Abbey style also because in my hometown, Wevelgem, there was an Abbey, Sister Jensen Abbey, and it was the first place where they made beer until 1794 when Napoleon closed it. But it's the abbeys were the origin of high fermentation, good quality beer in Belgium.
Well, then the next beer that you brewed would have been the XX Bitter. Is that right?
The next beer, in fact, is the Père Noël. But that's the first recipe that we tried with Guido. Guido was, at the moment that they started the brewery in 1994, Guido was a founder of Beer Tasting Club. And so that's how we connected. And we found that we have the same ideas. At that moment, it's quite difficult to commercialize beer in Belgium. So it was a weekend job. We both had other jobs, and it was a weekend job. And it was nice to have a buddy that has the same ideas, thinks the same, feel the same about the taste, and could help us also. And that's first time I made the Père Noël as an experimental beer with Guido's installation. And then we put that on the market. And just after, we put XX Bitter in the market, who is in fact a recipe developed by Guido because he wanted to try how bitter can you go without being too much.
I think that it's such an interesting beer, sort of historically, recent history, I suppose. Depends how far back you want to go. But because to me, it seems now like a beer that was very far ahead of its time. Mm-hmm. And yet you talking about how you and Guido were trying to make beers that really were like you remembered. It took, maybe it was kickstarted by XX Bitter, but it took Belgium another 10 years to really start getting into bitter beers and hops again.
Oh, yes, for sure. When we started XX Bitter, I remember that we didn't dare to put it on the market straight away. So we made a small batch of, I think, 300 liter, and we get on some festivals with it. Just with almost no name, bitter beer, experimental brew, something like that. And the reaction was, in fact, a little bit strange. We got a lot of people said, it's too bitter. But on the other hand, we had some people said, it was like a light burning in their head. So they were drinking and said, wow, what is this? I want to know what it is. And they were very interested. And we got a lot of brewers also coming after hearing from another one. I want to taste your bitter beer. And so they I like this. I'm a brewer, but you can't sell this. Okay, that's not our problem. We are just, that's a hobby for us. So at that moment we said, it's interesting. And I was, in fact, when Guido get this beer out, because he made it alone, and when he gets it out first time and he presented to me, the first thing I said was, we have to put this on the market. It's so nice. It's so balanced. It's the perfect balance. And he said, no, we can't do that. It's too bitter. I think, what do we risk? Let's make a batch and put some labels on it, and we will see if you can sell it or not. And that's where we went from. And that, luckily, it gives us some notoriety everywhere in the beer world, I think. And it took another 10 years, maybe even 15 years before Belgians started to drink beer. And still nowadays, it's still they are very spoiled by sweetness. The Belgian public is so used to sweetness that they know the industrial beers they know. You have a lot of bigger producers that sell sweet beers because it's a trend, a mode. The public is used to sweetness, and it's easy. Sweetness is easy selling, and bitterness needs how do you say a public that is more aware of other taste and is willing to experience other taste and learning to, because your taste is an evolution also. When I started brewing, of course, Guldenberg that I made first was my favorite taste, and little by little, I went away from it. No, it's still a good beer, but I don't drink it anymore. I drink bitter beers. My favorite is X6 bitter, or even lower in alcohol like Simplex. So it's an evolution, your taste, of course.
Let's talk a little bit about the hops themselves, because as we were rubbing hops earlier, I was really struck by the sensory and aromatic effect of that. Before we do that, from the rotatable pickup tube on Rogue Brewing's pilot brew house to the integrated hopbacks on Sierra Nevada's twin prototyping brew houses, SS Brewtech has taken technology they invented working with world-renowned industry veterans and made them available to every craft brewer. To learn more about SS Brewtech's innovation list, head on over to ssbrewtech.com. Also, if you're looking for a direct partnership with an independent hop grower who is as fanatical about flavor and quality as you are, join the revolution. Hop Revolution's only reason for being is sustainably farming and processing New Zealand's most flavorsome hops. They get that great beer is not brewed to a past or a future ideal. It's an ongoing journey of fresh thinking. Hop Revolution really is only here for your beer. Let them flavor your thinking stateside, directly from Hop Revolution or through Crosby Hops or Mill 95. Learn more at hoprevolution.co.nz. As we were touring with Sander earlier today around the brew house, we went into the hop cooler and rubbed some of the hops. I think it was a Brewer's Gold hop that we were rubbing. And having rubbed plenty of American hops from the Pacific Northwest, and having, when I do that, everything around me, everything on my body starts to smell like that hop, and my hands are stained, and there's an intensity to the aroma that comes from those hops it's just very overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And as we were rubbing these Brewer's Gold hops that are grown locally here in Belgium, I was struck by how subtle it was, how they had a beautiful character to them, but they had so much less intensity, to where even after rubbing them, I could smell my hands or clean my hands off, and they weren't stained, and they didn't have this pervasive aroma to them. It was a very different physical experience, and I think that has to again impact how that works within the beer itself.
Yeah, of course. If you compare real American hops breeded in America, it's very different. You can see for example, our beer that we have, Amer is the name is French for bitterness, Amer, but it's also Amer Américain, so American bitterness. And in fact, it's made with two hops, Centennial and Cascade, who are two of the three C's, I think. But it's breeded here in Belgium. So it's the American variety breeded in Belgium, and it gives you complete different. So it's really terroir of beer. The terroir that you have in Washington or Oregon gets in the flowers, and what we get here from the soil here is completely different, even with the same varieties. So you can make totally different things with the same variety, even if the rest of the recipe is exactly the same. You can do different things with just where the hops are breeded.
How would you describe a difference, say, between an American Cascade and a Belgian Cascade?
Oh, the Belgian Cascades don't have that pungent thing that you just explained. The fact that it's so overwhelming, it's so expressive that you can almost feel it from a distance. And And you don't have that in that. It's very more close to European hops. It has some difference, but it's more subtle also. It's completely different. So that shows where your hop is grown. It influences a lot. And also, of course, the most of the hops we have here have low alphas. So it's not so expressive because of the alphas is much lower. More less oil means less pungent taste or nose, or it's quite different in that way also. So all the hops we use are low alphas because we select on taste, and we prefer to use a lot of it to give the bitterness, and not using a hop who is very powerful, but it's often overpowering also the beer. So we try to find the balance between. I like American IPAs. Don't let you be misunderstood.
Sure.
I like it very much. Many times it's a little bit overdue, I find. But if it's well done, I have some good friends in American brewers that make wonderful IPAs, and I like it very much. And if it's well done, it's wonderful. But it's a different kind of beer. It's not the beer we make.
Yeah.
I have, for example, a brewer that brews here that uses American hops, and he makes a Super Fresca, who is a wonderful beer. And it still has that very present nose that you find in American IPAs. And it's very nicely made also, but it's not the style we make.
I would be, thinking about it from a brewing perspective, I would be worried, at that lower level with that much more vegetal material that you might pick up some of those vegetal notes from using that quantity of hops. But I also found that the hops seem to have less of that kind of character also. They seem to not have, maybe some of the more intense green, and plant matter kind of notes to them at the same time, just because that lower intensity, they just don't seem to, produce some of those less desirable hops characters as, just as much as the desirable ones are low, the less desirable ones are also low. And so they almost work in tandem with each other.
Yeah, but in my opinion, that's different origin. The origin is also the integrity of the leaf. If you have the whole cone, the leaf is not grinded, so it doesn't. It's more closed. It doesn't gives you the woody character of the leaf, because if you mill it, it's all small particles. You can get out more of the other things than only the hop oils. In our case, the flower stays as a whole, so it's more difficult to disintegrate it in the boil. So it's mostly you get out the oil, but the rest is more difficult. So it's another way of working, and that influences it influences highly your taste of the beer. So if you use pellets, also that has an influence. The fact that all the particles, all the leaves are cut in little pieces,
sure,
gives you more extract from it.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and that's a different way of doing it.
Sure. Is there another beer that we should discuss that you have a very particular viewpoint on?
Well, I think we definitely need to talk about the barrel program. Doing some really interesting things here with, of course, maybe talking about Cuvée de Ranke and Kriek de Ranke would be a good place to start. And then all the things you've done since then. I'm in awe of the Miracle and the Weinberg and these other things, and because you're playing around with lambic beers and our brewing beers and things. And could you talk about some of that and how that's evolving?
Yeah, of course. The origin of that, in fact, is you have to go back to the beginning of what we did. When we started brewing, we were still having Rollmuck yeast. So Rollmuck yeast was from a sour beer, and you could go to the brewery. It was like 20 kilometers from here, and you could get some yeast and brew with it. And it was fantastic yeast to work with. The only thing is, at the moment, it was going up in a bigger brewery, and at that moment, they decided not to sell any yeast anymore. So that changes the beer, of course, but.
But I'm curious about using the Rodenbach yeast in the early days. So was there any lactobacillus or anything in there that was that.
That's what
affected?
happened if you have in that time a Guldenberg or even an XX bitter, because of a lot of hops, it restricted the becoming sour. But nevertheless, after 6 months, your XX or Guldenberg or Pernod would have a slightly sour touch, and that changes the beer, of course. And then in 2000, we have to find another yeast, so we choose for a commercial yeast at that moment, and it changed the beer completely. But the origin of the creek, that's where I want to go, is in fact in a brew that we made with this Rolmac yeast, but with less hops, because it was a demand of a bar owner that wanted to have a beer with less hops, with less bitterness. So we made the brew of that beer, and after 6 weeks, it became sour. At that moment, the bar owner said, "I don't want this beer; it's sour." So at that moment, we said, "What are we going to do now with this beer?" And the idea was, what did they do in the old times when beer became sour? They put it on fruit, for example. So we put it on cherries. And after the end of the fermentation on cherries, we find it okay, but not completely what we want. And at that certain moment, we sat down at Guido's. We were huge fans of Girardin. And we were mixing this beer with Girardin. And so the light came up, and we said, yeah, that's the way to go. And at that moment, we started blending. Just like if you go in history in Belgium, you can find a lot of brewers that just blended beer, because all the beers were aged in wooden fermenters. They started only in the 1930s using steel enamel fermenters. Before, all the beer was kept in wood. Means you have to sell it fast, because at that moment they didn't pasteurize. You have to sell it fast, and it has to be drunk fast. So if beer became sour, it was another product. So then you make a new kind of beer, or you put it on cherries, or later, if that doesn't work, you make vinegar. That's what most breweries did. And that's how we started making Kriek cherry beer. Later was some demand from Shelton Brothers that said, why don't you sell the beer as the original beer without the cherries? And then we made 5 years later, only in 2005, I think, the cuvée with the same, without the cherries, of course, so just aged beer, wood fermented beer. Normally barley, no addition of wheat, no spontaneous fermentation, just normal fermentation. Put it on wood, let it sit for 1 year, and it ages and becomes sour also. Not that, just like in a lambic way, but in a different way. You have first the alcoholic fermentation, and then you develop the acidic fermentation. If you make a lambic, it's just the opposite. You mix with a part of wheat, and then you have spontaneous fermentation, means development of sour, and then the alcoholic fermentation starts. We went from there, and we still were blending with lambic then, and it's both the Kriek and the cuvée de Ranke are blended with lambic. In fact, 30% lambic. There's on 100 liter, we add 30 liter of lambic before bottling, and it develops in the bottle then. So, like for the Kriek, it means making the beer now is selling it in 2 years. So it's a very slow way of making beer. And after that, yeah, we both are in love with lambics and sour beers, and we have so much tradition here in Belgium. And then we started using lambics from other producers. We started, I think, in 2009. For the first time, we made Back to Black, which is in fact an old recipe that I found in an English book, and that was one way speaking about Ballantines in America, and then also the old porter style in Burton-on-Trent. So I married these two, and it made the Back to Black. It's a beer from 9% alcohol with 100% 100 IBU bitterness, and then aged for 9 months in wood, and then bottled. And then we could see that that developed like some oat-brewing character. And from there we went down to develop, for example, the Weinberg later. Another thing is Vieille Provision, for example, is the base beer that we use before we make Cuvée de Ranke. And then a lot later development was also making lambic, because we could see that most of the lambic producers that were keeping their lambic for them, not selling it anymore.
Sure.
Well, they often come from tradition that they were selling 80% of their production to Heusenstekers. And at a certain moment, when lambic and Gueuze became popular again, they were keeping it for themselves. So at a certain moment said, the only thing to have more lambic is to make it yourself. And so we make also a kind of lambic that we call Spier lambic, because this is not the Zenne here, but it's the Spier, a small river here. And we make like a blend that we don't call Eau de Heuze, but it's very similar, and we call it Miracle, because it can happen here that you make this kind of beer. But I don't want to be a competitor of that. I just want to show that we can do it. So it's very small batches. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 bottles in a year, and that's it. We do it as an amusement, as a hobby.
Yeah, and you're using the cool ship, and is the wort also similar?
We have a small cool ship. So what we do at the moment is chilling just a part of the wort on a cool ship. The rest is normally chilled, and when the other the 300 liters chilled on a cool ship get in action, we get them together, and from there it develops. It's a little bit different than cooling everything in a cool ship, but it's also the way that some lambic producers do it.
Sure.
Some more industrial lambic producers do it this way. But my ambition is to build a cool ship also here for an entire brewer. That's for the next 2 years, let's say.
Yeah, yeah. So with Cuvée de Ranke, you blend 30% lambic with 70% of your wood-aged beer that has soured in foeders, right?
Yeah.
Why blend? Why not release a single stream beer that just has gone through, just the foeder beer by itself?
Because it's different. Because you don't have the same complexity in just a foeder beer. If you try the Vieille Provision, what we put on the market, that's that, in fact.
Yeah.
And it's a good beer, but it has a slightly sour, but also some woodiness. And it's a good beer, it's a nice beer, but it's not my favorite. I like the complexity that you find in more elaborated beers, just like in lambic, and so we want to have this complexity in it. And we also find that blended beer are very interesting, because it can give you a development that you don't find in. If you have one lambic brewery, you get out one lambic, and you can taste it almost nine times out of 10. You taste the lambic, and you will tell from what brewery it comes. If you have a Heusenstekers, he uses 2-3 different origins, and he has 1, 2, 3-year-old. So he has, in place of three different lambics, he has 9 or 12 or more. And he can create much more complexity. As a staker, as a blender, you have it's another job. It's the thing is to marry tastes and to create complexity, and then you can age it, and it can make a very nice evolution. So I don't like to do things the way with adding bacteries, for example. You can go much faster, but the complexity is 9 times out of 10, it's not there. And
rather, so you don't pitch lactobacillus or something like you
No.
don't want to speed that up.
No. So we always make a beer, put it on wood, and wait, and then you see. After 6 months, you can start to taste, and after another 9 months, you can start to taste, and then you see what happens. And blending it, I believe in this way of doing it, but that's my belief.
Sure. Well, we're getting on in time. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about, the near-term future and then the long-term future for de Ranke. Now, we're sitting in a tap room that you have built somewhat recently. I imagine investing in a tap room at the brewery right before the pandemic was not a great business move, but it's a beautiful, and I say that jokingly. It's a beautiful space in which to engage with people. What are some of the the near-term goals for the brewery? What do you hope to achieve soon, and what's the big picture, long-term goal for the brewery?
Well, it's quite simple. I think we go just for the best quality for every beer we make, and that's the only goal, and it has to be the only goal. And of course, we want to grow a little bit, and we have some ambitions, but the ambition cannot make that the quality goes down, and that's our only concern, and on our only. We are both 63, so we are going down, and we know that. I think.
Sure.
And that's why we have a bunch of young guys who are here, and it's my daughter and also my son-in-law Alexander that you spoke with, but also like Jonas, another brewer that works here, who are all passionate about beer and like good beer and want to do everything to achieve the goal to try to make the best beer. I don't say we are the best brewery, but we try to make the best beer, and we want to do it in a natural way. We don't want to have ads. There's no ads in our beer. We just use the 5 different raw materials you need to make beer, and we include sugar in that because we do ferment in the bottle, of course. And for the rest, it's just the whole is just to have enough growing to make the company alive and vibrant and still can invest in new things and development. I don't have the ambition to be the biggest one. I don't have the ambition to be, I don't know. My ambition is not money.
We could tell that when we were touring the brewery earlier. You produce about, 8,000 hectoliters per year?
Yeah, that's more or less what we do.
But it looks like a brewery that produces much more beer than that, because the way that you all have it set up, to make it better, higher quality, easier for your brewers to make the beer and to make it exactly the way you want, is very evident in the design of the brewery. If making money was the only goal, it wouldn't be as well appointed as it is for a brewery of that size.
Yeah, of course. Then you do. I always say, if you don't want to earn money, don't make beer with whole hops. On the other hand, I find it's a very nice way to be a brewer also, because you can say I don't care about all the other guys that are in the chicken run, and I just do my thing, and that's a good way, I think. I've been in my life once in a business who are very on the edge, let's say, and very difficult to earn money and very difficult to be, because there was so much competition. And I said, I don't want that in my life. I want to be able to do what I want to do, and if I can earn my life with that, that's more than enough. I don't need a pile of money. If I die, you don't take it away. So that's how I think about it.
Well, I think that's probably a good note to wrap this up on. Thank you, Nino, for talking to us about brewing. For nearly 30 years, G&D Chillers has set the mark for quality equipment you can rely on. RAR's headquarters in Shakopee, Minnesota is powered by renewable electricity. Trust the experts at Old Orchard to handle freight for your ingredients. Get detailed insight into your fermentations with Brew Monitor risk-free. Put SS Brewtech's advances to work in your brew house, and try New Zealand's most flavorful sustainably farmed hops from Hop Revolution. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, go to beerandbrewing.com, click on the subscribe button, and read all the fantastic content that our writers develop for the magazine. Nino, again, thank you for joining us on the podcast. If people want to learn more about the Ranke, where can they learn more, on the internet or in person?
Yeah, of course, you can find already a lot of information on the website, www.ranke.be. And for the rest is a lot of to find on the internet also of the brewery. And of course, who is really want to talk, they all always can send them a mail. But and if you have time, we will respond.
I think I have to interject also, because I know it's always easier said than done to say you should come here. But where we're sitting up here in the tap room, right, like on this perch, looking at the rooftops of Dautigny and drinking some really delicious beers, and it's just been a real pleasure. And for me, this is a place I've been wanting to visit. I've been to the brewery before, but not since the tap room opened. So to be here is really cool. It's open on Fridays and Saturdays. Plan your trip around that if you're going to come over here. I highly recommend it.
It's a beautiful view with some beautiful beers. You're absolutely right. Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast, Nino. Cheers.
It's my pleasure. Thank you to be here. Yeah, and santé.
Santé.
This podcast is brought to you by Craft Beer and Brewing Magazine for those that love to make and drink great beer. Learn more online or subscribe at beerandbrewing.com or find us on social media at Craft Beer Brew.